Well, I'm Dale Fairbanks. I build guitars in Hartford, Connecticut, USA, and I've been doing this since around 2000 and making a living at it since 2011. I got interested in guitar when I was 15. I saw a acoustic blues player in Providence, Rhode Island, named Paul Jeremiah. I was a musician at that point. I had started trumpet when I was 9, so I was well into the trumpet world and planning to attend college, which I did for trumpet at the Berklee College of Music. But seeing Paul Jeremiah has set me on another path in tandem with my supposed trumpet career. And I became interested in early blues, ragtime, and folk music from the 20s and 30s. I had already listened to a lot of it through my trumpet studies. I was a big Louis Armstrong fan at that point, and Red Allen, and all those great early trumpet players. Paul played a 1930s J35. That was his main instrument, and I became very interested in that particular body style, which is the slope-shouldered jumbo body style. Well, he had two guitars. He had the slope shoulder and the Stella 12 string. I've headed away from the Stella style a little bit and focused more on the early Gibson acoustics, which are, in my mind, the most perfect guitar ever built in a factory. I reproduce those as well as I can, and make improvements where I think improvements need to be made, and I put as much personality into the guitar as I can. Those old guitars have tons of personality. It's a weird concept to try to build into personality into an acoustic guitar, but I think I'm doing a pretty good job. The model line I have is very similar to the model line that the early factory guitar makers had from the 30s to the 50s. So, from smallest to largest, I have that old Robert Johnson photograph where he's holding that L1. I have that small body guitar. I think it's 13 and quarter at the lower bout. It's a great little guitar. The originals were strangely braced. They had the top bracing was a kind of a mix between an A and an H brace. I've had a few of those in my shop, and they're great sounding guitars. It produces an odd sound. It's kind of a ladder braced tone crossed with an X brace guitar. It's a good tone. It's not something I'd want to emulate in a new guitar, and they haven't really held up structurally the way they should. So with mine, it's a really small top. So instead of having a wider splayed X, I do a 90-degree X, which is not uncommon with my style of building, which is with a thin top and heavier braces. It really is a good sounding guitar. The X brace kind of brings out some of those lush mids and highs and a nice thumpy bass. Makes for a pretty loud guitar in such a small body. It's incredible. I have one sitting right here in front of me I'm working on. So from there we go to the L versions, which were the next size up in the Gibson line of the 20s and 30s. And so they got rid of the L1. They switched to the L. That has two versions that I make also. It's the shallow version and the Nick Lucas, which is also just about 4 inches at the neck block. And this longer and wider guitar. It's 14 and 3/4 across the lower bout. I have room to make a nice wide X brace about 100 degrees. I place the joint of the X just about as close to the sound hole as I can get. From there, we go to a J185 copy, which is my F40. And those are usually in maple with a beautiful full body burst. I used a 1953 version to copy from that my friend Martin Gross went here in Providence has. His original has a very light burst. Very good sounding guitar. It was made before Gibson started putting those heavy braces in and trying to reduce warranty repairs. I'm not crazy about the parallelograms on the fingerboard, but people love originality, so I put those in. I make one with dots on the fingerboard too. I call that my shaker version. I prefer actually no inlay on the fingerboard for these guitars, just because the wood I use in the Sunburst is so spectacular. And from J185, my F35, which is a J35 copy, the classic slope-shouldered dreadnought, which is my all-time favorite design for a guitar. It has this growl and this thump that you cannot resist. The way I build it with the thinner top and heavier braces, you get some nice spark going on, which is perfect for blues fingerstyle. Old-time bands want to cut through a little bit. It's a powerful guitar. So the Roy Smack puts the bridge down in the middle of the lower bow, which brings out all the overtones and the lushness that the 14 fret version has a hard time producing. And I have one in the shop also right now. I just finished up, and I hold that in my lap, and you can just feel it vibrating when you play. It's amazing. I think it's the second, second favorite design for a slope shoulder dreadnought. It's odd looking. You got the slope shoulder dreadnought body, and you got this sound hole that's kind of down where it shouldn't be. You know, they're made originally to be lap style guitars with a big fat square neck and played flat in the lap, and you don't really see the guitar that much. So, but when you convert the neck and you have a round neck and you're holding it Spanish style, you're really seeing the oddness of that shape in the sound hole where it is. But you get so used to it. The best sunbursts I have seen have actually been on some of John Thomas's guitars. I had his L1 in the shop for a while, along with his 29 large body Nick Lucas. And they both had these sunbursts, which were to die for. They were hand applied, and they were on the bare wood. And at the darkest edges, you could still see the grain. I'm sure it looked wonderful new, and I'm sure it looked vintage new, but an actual vintage guitar with a vintage sunburst like that was just blew my head right off. So I'm looking at these sunbursts, and I'm looking at the newer sunbursts from factories, well-respected factories, and the newer ones didn't have it. They didn't have the depth or the color. So what I did, which I find is working out pretty well, is I'm using end line dyes, mix that with lacquer thinner, and I take the bare spruce and I start spraying. There's not much room for error, so I spray the bursts with the dyed lacquer thinner, and I go from the center with a nice rich amber, which alone looks just absolutely horrid. I work my way out to the edges, darker and darker, amber and reddish and browns, and right towards the edge, I put a nice black in there, unless I want something lighter. And even with the black sprayed towards the edges, you can still see the grain through it, which is just perfect. I try to stay away from lacquer toners or sprayed lacquer colors because those are opaque. And towards the edges, you can look at new factory guitars. You can't see anything but black, and it's like, how much blacker can you get? I do about 8 coats of that on the top, and my finishes end up at the very end after final buffing and polishing to be about 2 to 3 thousandths of an inch thick. So when finish a guitar, I string it up. It needs an overnight. It needs to close its eyes and rest and get used to the tension on its top. And I'll come back to that guitar after it's strung up for the first time. I'll come back to it in a couple days, in a week, and it will have dramatically changed. And that's what I want to hear. The sound just popping out, it's opening right up, and it will continue to do so for months and years. And from there, it's just clear sailing. It's just going to get better, and that's an amazing experience. I'm not looking for a boutique built fingerstyle tone, if you know what I mean. I'm looking for dryness, but at the same time, I'm looking for a richness that's there when you want it. You know, I'm looking for a guitar that cuts through when you play it near the bridge, and that just makes you want to play Autumn Leaves when you play it near the fingerboard extension. Most of all, I want to be able to hear that vintage sound